My name's Pauline Ramig. I'm chair of the South Franklin Circle Dialogues Committee. And committee members, would you please stand? The residents of South Franklin Circle are delighted to welcome all guests this evening. And we'd like to especially acknowledge the following. And if you'd please hold your applause until they've all been recognized. Kendra Erdzik, President and CEO of Judson Senior Living. Nancy Satula, South Franklin Circle's relatively new Executive Director. Beth Imbrescia, Vice President of the Judson Foundation. Gary Lipscomb, way in the back, Judson Chief Information Officer. Treasurer. Sean, we were going to have Jake here tonight, but Sean is here instead. Sean Heron with the Judson IT department. He's in the back in the AV room, and he's prepared to stream this evening's event to our remote audience. And Darlene Cash, way in the back too, South Franklin Circle's Community Life Director. A welcoming applause. And then there's the dialogue sponsors. And we express our gratitude to all sponsors for the season, all of them South Franklin Circle residents. And they help provide honorariums and then underwrite reception costs. So thank you to you all. But now a very special thank you to this evening's sponsors. Kathy Lewis. Carol Markey. And Jack Wilharm. You can just wave if you want. Our next dialogue is March 19 with Kate Borders, who is the president of University Circle Incorporated. And following today's presentation, we'll break and move to Q&A. The break will be very small because I'll be ready with the mic. So especially since we have viewers on our new live streaming system, be sure to give your name, wait for the mic, give your name, and then state your question. And now it's my great pleasure to welcome Kathy Lewis to the podium, who will introduce this evening's speaker.
Good evening. My name is Kathy Lewis, and it is my privilege to introduce the new president and CEO of Playhouse Square, Craig Hassall. I'm going to ask you to bear with me for just 1 minute as I read a quick list. CEO, Royal Albert Hall, London. CEO, Opera Australia. CEO, English National Ballet. Consultant to the 2012 London Olympic Games, General Manager for the image at the 2010 Sydney Olympic Games, special events and arts festivals, a role that led to the development and delivery of a comprehensive, substantial, and successful 4-year cultural program. He has served on many boards, including the London International Festival of Theatre, the Australian Centre for Craft and Design, the English National Ballet School, and the University of London, just to name a few. So I hope you can imagine how overwhelmed I felt when I learned that I was to have lunch with him shortly after his arrival in Cleveland. But Craig is a man of creativity first and foremost, and surprises. So he spent most of our lunch telling me how thrilled he is to come to Cleveland. So here tonight is the transplant with vision, Craig Hassall.
Thank you, Kathy. That was going to be a very death-defying moment. I'm not a specialist in IT, though. Oh, there we are. Brilliant. Thanks so much. Good evening, everyone. It's so great to be here, and thank you for coming and taking time to listen to my view of all of you. So I was asked to respond and give a transplant's view of Cleveland. I do it with some trepidation because I imagine some of you have been here for quite a while. So I say everything I say with a mere 2 years experience of your city. So be kind to me. And I do want to allow time for questions. So I'm going to get, Pauline's going to give me this. This means stop talking. So, well, Kathy's done the first bit for me. You've explained where I've come from. I'm Australian, but I lived in London for quite a while and worked in opera and ballet and theatre and ran a few venues and worked on the Olympic Games in London and Sydney, all of which was great. And when I was approached to come and run Playhouse Square, the headhunter rang me in London and said, "Now, Craig, I have an opportunity for you. It's in Cleveland, Ohio. Don't hang up. Don't let me just listen. Just let me finish." And I heard about it, and I said, where is Cleveland? It was West Coast, right? She goes, "It's on the Great Lakes, actually." I said, "Oh, I've not been there. I should go and have a look around." And I've told this story so many times, and some of you may have heard it before. When I came for one of the interviews, Tom Adler, who I'm sure many of you know, was on the panel, and we were in the Key Bank Tower, that big, shiny, towering building in the middle of Cleveland. And Tom said, "We've got to get him out of here. We've got to show him the theatres." So we raced down, had a whistle-stop tour of all the theatres, well, not all, some of the theatres at Playhouse Square. And honestly, I came back to London and said, actually, I might do this. This could be good after all. It's quite amazing. I had no idea what was that. I'd never heard of Playhouse Square. I had no clue. And honestly, what swung me to move to Cleveland was Playhouse Square. And the two things were the theatres which you all know, which are exquisite and in great shape and well looked after, and the trustees. I mean, the attitude of the trustees was so incredibly positive. And I've learned since that attitude is one of the hallmarks of Cleveland, that the attitude here, and I say this not being American, but I say there's a Midwest attitude, but it's not a parochial attitude. People in Cleveland travel, they're well-read, they're learned, they're very loyal and very proud of the assets they have here, and all of that makes for a really positive environment to live and work in. So that's my first impression of Cleveland. It's my third winter in Cleveland. I arrived in the middle of winter, and I had one more, and then I had this one. And this one, it's challenging, but I think I said to Pauline when I arrived, living in London, the weather, who's been in London, hands up? Okay, well, so right? It's not exactly Barbados, you know what I mean? I mean, it's beautiful, but when I moved from Australia, which does have lovely weather, to London, a good friend in London said, "Okay, Craig, here's how you cope with London weather. You just have to imagine that the default color is gray. Occasionally it's sunny, occasionally it rains, but it's usually just gray and a little bit damp. And that's fine. Once you get your head around that, it's okay." Now, Cleveland, everyone said, "Oh, it's just, the weather's terrible. It's bitterly cold and blah, blah, blah." I arrived, and then the spring was beautiful, the summers were beautiful, the autumns were beautiful, and then it got a bit colder. Honestly, the weather's been totally fine. And I've also had, I'm happy to say, I should be on commission for this, over 26 different groups of visitors from either Australia, London, Europe, or the United States coming to visit me in Cleveland, coming here for the first time, and without exception going away saying, "I had no idea this place existed or was like this." I was like, "But why? Why?" They said, "Oh, we just don't really think, it doesn't really enter our thoughts to come to Cleveland." And they said, well, we're going to come back now we've been here. So that's just hold that thought, because that is a thread through what I'm going to say in the presentation today. So, Cleveland, I love it. Where is that? Is that downtown? Is it? Yeah? Yeah, well, I love these script signs. I live in Edgewater, and we've got one in our park, and I just think every time it's on my to-do, my guests, we go up down the road, photograph the Cleveland sign, off you go. So 2 years in, the weather I've talked about. The assets that you have here are exquisite and extraordinary. And I have a list now of restaurants, bars, cafes, sites, weekend trips, day trips, weekend trips, and I curate my visit depending on the personality of the visitor. So when my mum came last year, we went to Niagara-on-the-Lake for a weekend, which was beautiful. I went to the art museum and all around, and went down to visit the Amish in Amish country, and she loved all that. She took about 4 kilograms of jam back to Australia. So it's great. And as I say, the assets on offer are pretty extraordinary. Of course, I would say this, the greatest asset is Playhouse Square. Just a little bit on that and a bit more later. I also say publicly and proudly, I have not been helicoptered into Cleveland to rescue this failing organization. Playhouse Square is fine. It was fine when I arrived. It's better now, and it has very good bones. I'm looking at Kathy, I'm looking at other folk. You know, what was done here many years ago to rescue those theatres is extraordinary. We were just saying before, it should be a Broadway show. It's a great story. Ray Shepherdson and the Junior League we talked about, John Lewis, Pudge Henkel, all these folk that over time rescued these derelict theatres and then raised the money to restore them. And now here we have this extraordinary asset in Cleveland. And I don't think that people who are from Cleveland quite appreciate how amazing the asset is. I mean, these theatres are extraordinarily well designed, built, and occupied. And I like to say what's great about Cleveland is these theatres were rescued by Cleveland folk, restored and funded by Cleveland folk, and now patronized by Cleveland folk. I mean, wouldn't it be a terrible shame if the folk who were involved, you know, John and Kathy and everyone else were involved, and then nobody came to the shows, or the theatres were empty? But in fact, the opposite is the case. Because of those theatres and the quality and the proximity of them in a district, we had the largest season ticket holder base in the country, more than Chicago, New York, LA, anywhere. The highest number of subscribers right here in Cleveland, and that's pretty extraordinary. It's a credit to the culture and the attitude of the locals here that we have that. It's phenomenal. So I like to say that we are the largest theatre district outside New York City, which is actually true and amazing. And just to give you a context for that, the KeyBank State Theatre, which I'm sure many of you have been to, is 3,200 seats, which is larger than any theatre in the West End of London. I mean, Drury Lane's about 2,700 seats. So we have in Cleveland a theatre larger than any London stage. It's phenomenal. And the Connor Palace is 2,700 seats. So it's the equivalent to the largest theatre in London. And that's right here on our doorstep in Cleveland. It's phenomenal. And as I say, it's also great that they're also so well attended and so well patronized by folk like you and your families. It's a wonderful thing. So here's my shopping list, or my hit list of what I think is great about Cleveland. I just threw another sign in because they're so good. That might be my Edgewater one. Is that Edgewater Park, do you think? I think so, yeah. Yeah, I've got about 25 photographs of that. So here we are. In no particular order, the cultural assets that we have here in Cleveland, and I'll just say in advance of running through this list, what's also great about this list and Cleveland is that I now know all the CEOs. You mentioned Kate Borders is coming to speak. She's been a great colleague, and we all get on tremendously well, and we don't feel that we compete for audiences or donors or airspace or eyeballs. There's a really great sense of collaboration between the cultural entities of Cleveland. I meet with Sonia from the Natural History Museum, and Andre and Greg from the Rock Hall, Bill from the Art Museum. We meet about every quarter just to compare notes and war stories, and it's a tremendously collegiate group, and I'm so impressed about that. And speaking out of school, it wasn't the case in London. I mean, London's a very crowded and complicated art scene, and there simply isn't the same level of collaboration. There was for a moment during the pandemic, oddly, but after the pandemic, it went back to its old ways, and there wasn't a network or a sense of support that we have amongst the cultural assets here in Cleveland. So, I mean, the Metro Parks, I put first, this is not in order, but I love the Metro Parks. If I have time on a weekend, I throw my bike in the back of the car and go out to the park, and you can cycle around forever, and there's hiking trails, fishing, and all sorts. And I think any time of the year, the Metro Parks are fantastic and a great asset for us. The Cleveland Orchestra, and there's a great story I knew of because I was running the Royal Albert Hall, and we had a a festival called the Proms. And the Proms, it's the largest classical music festival in the world. We have orchestras from all over the world, the Berlin Phil, the LA Phil, and so on and so on. And the Cleveland Orchestra came 3 times whilst I was running the Royal Albert Hall. So I got to know the orchestra quite well over that time. And they are regarded, I would say, in the top 5 orchestras in the world, without question. But a great story with the orchestra, Andre Gremier, who runs the orchestra, I knew from Australia, weirdly. I was running Opera Australia, and Andre was the CEO of the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra. So I knew Andre many years ago, and we met up. I said, "What on earth are we doing in Cleveland?" He said, "I don't know." Anyway, what do you think? I said, "Oh, it's good so far." So it's great. The museum, it's, again, this is a huge asset for the people of Cleveland. I don't think we realize how significant the collection is and how extraordinary that institution is here in Cleveland, and I hope you all support it because it deserves our support, and it's an absolute treasure for the city. Karamu House I put on because we've just made the Karamu House an affiliate company of Playhouse Square. Now, I don't know if you know, but Karamu House is the oldest black theatre company in the United States, and it's right here in Cleveland. They do great work, they've got wonderful theatres. They don't need to be resident at Playhouse Square, but they are an affiliate company of ours, and we're doing a lot of work with them now on commissioning works and working on education programs. And it's amazing. I had to put major sports here, even I'm not really a sports person, but I thought, well, we've got 3 major teams, cheek by jowl in the downtown. It is part of the personality of Cleveland. The story I'd like to tell is, I went to the baseball and someone was trying to explain the rules to me, unsuccessfully. And apologising for how long it is, but then saying, "Oh no, but it's much shorter. It used to be 20 minutes longer because now the pitcher does something or whatever. It's only now 2.5 hours long." I said, "That's nothing." I said, "Where I come from, we have cricket tests that last 3 to 5 days, and sometimes without a result." And they're like, "What?" I said, "Well, they stop for tea and all sorts." They're like, "What are you talking about?" So baseball's a snip. It went by in a flash. So I had a great time. The Rock Hall, I had heard of the Rock Hall, but I didn't know where it was. And now Greg Harris is a great friend, and the induction is, what a great ad for Cleveland, that the induction now happens every other year, every 3 years here in Cleveland. I went this year for the first time. It was phenomenal, and so the profile that brings to Cleveland is extraordinary. We're so lucky to have it. And just a very quick story, I'm going to go on and on. You will. I heard that the reason the Rock Hall is in Cleveland is not because that was the natural home of the Rock Hall. It was up against Memphis and Vegas and LA and New York and other places. And the reason, what tipped the judges into choosing Cleveland was they got so many signatures from Cleveland residents saying, "We want the Rock Hall." They thought, well, obviously the people of Cleveland want this to be here, and so Cleveland won the competition. So that's just another example, like Playhouse Square, of the people of Cleveland really sticking up for the arts in a really substantial way. So that's terrific. The Cleveland Public Library is phenomenal and enormous and such an asset, a bit like Playhouse Square. It's a kind of a vestige of that huge industrial age a century ago. The library, Felton Thomas, who a lot of you will know, who runs the library, is a great friend as well. Quick fact about the library, when you go in there, go into the old building, there's that lovely hall, and there's these beautiful like oak architraves around the doors. Go and tap them, and they're metal. And the reason they're metal, and they look like wood, is because that building was built just in the wake of the Great Fire of Chicago, and the city planning said you cannot use wood anymore. It can be stone and metal, no wood. And so that's why when you tap the architraves, they're metal. Did anyone know that? Oh, that's great. Well, there we are. Lakeview Cemetery I put on because Kathy Goss, who's now a great friend, was on Leadership Cleveland with me, and I love that place. It's so beautiful. The daffodils, you all know about those. They're amazing. But the Wade Chapel, particularly, it's on my list. Every visitor goes to the Wade Chapel. We always go there. The volunteers tell the story. It's phenomenal. That Tiffany glass window is without doubt the best example of Tiffany glass in the world, and it's in Cleveland, in the cemetery, for free in the Wade Chapel. Extraordinary. And the fact that Tiffany designed all those interiors, the mosaic tiles and the benches and the chandeliers and the mosaic walls, everything is so exquisite, and it's right here in Cleveland. I took a friend who's an art collector from London. He was completely blown away. He'd never heard of it. And he imports and sells Tiffany glass in London. He'd never heard of the Wade Chapel. I was like, what? Crazy. University Circle, I'm glad I put that on because I hear Kate's coming. I think it's a great collection. What I love about that the Circle is it's a different district to Playhouse Square. Again, we don't compete at all for audiences and so on. The institutions that are there are wonderful, and it's just a great asset for the city. I think it's really terrific. As is West Side Markets. Has everyone been to the West Side Markets? Great. I live quite near there. It's wonderful. I learnt the other week it was built as a market. It wasn't a railway station. It was built as a market, a covered market back in the day, and it's absolutely beautiful. And the beef's very good. Sign of Cleveland. And then this is not so much cultural things, but just the DNA of Cleveland, things that I think make the personality, if you like, of this city, what I've learned in my 2 years. The industrial history speaks for itself. The salt mines and the steel yards and all the money that the industrial history brought to Cleveland, which allowed Rockefeller to be here and the museum to be built and our places to be built and the library and so on. We have that as a hallmark of our DNA, and it's really terribly important to what Cleveland is as a city. The philanthropic pride I've touched on, and it's absolutely true, that you're a very generous city. You really support your arts and your hospital sector and your education sector, and it's necessary and vital, and it's very apparent. And it's quite different to the British ethos, I have to say. We haven't got time to talk about the British ethos, but it's just different, and it's very positive here. I like it very much. The medical community, someone said to me, if you're going to be sick in Cleveland. And I think it's true. The clinic, amazing, I mean, the level of support we have for health services here is phenomenal. Although I would just say, one thing I learned on my Leadership Cleveland course is that we have great health, but there's a great disparity in health as well. And one of my colleagues on the course was Jasmine Long, who's working on building a new center. You know about this? Yeah, it's called Birthing Beautiful Babies. And we're working with her on a project to create lullabies for expectant mothers, to give them a sense of pride and determination and to go to full term. Because the incident of infant mortality amongst young pregnant black women is the fifth highest in the country here in Cleveland. So there's a way to go, but there's some great things like what Jasmine's doing to make it happen, which is terrific. I put the motorways because you don't understand if you're from here, there's no traffic in Cleveland. Like it took me 25 minutes to get here from Playhouse Square. Where are all the cars? I came from London. I wouldn't even drive in London. It's pointless. It's impossible. Here, no cars. It's great. Lake Erie, the great under-recognized asset of our city. This beautiful lake, currently frozen, which I think is quite cool, but we need to do more with the lake. The museum, of course, I've mentioned it's spectacular. It's there for a number of reasons. It's a great founding centerpiece of University Circle and a huge treasure for the city. Carrimere House I put again because it's so great. And the university, the tertiary sector, and I include Tri-C in this and CSU and all of those other institutions. We, I think, again, punch above our weight in terms of what we have here in the tertiary sector. And interestingly, we are doing some work now on career pipeline development, trying to formalize the pipeline of young people who want to work in our industry who study at CSU or Tri-C. Because if we can formalize the pipeline, it means that places like Boulder and Wallace and CSU can go out to university fairs and say, if you choose to come to Cleveland and study, you will work on a Broadway show. You will work backstage at Playhouse Square. You will be in the marketing department at Playhouse Square. So all of these things are assets that we can help those institutions use to sell themselves out there in the world, in the competitive world of tertiary study. And that's probably from today. And then just finally, Playhouse Square. I had to finish with that because it's just, so fantastic. We have 12 theatres, but soon it'll be 15 venues, actually. So we have 12 right now. We just bought a Greyhound bus station. We just bought another building. We're turning another space into a jazz club and another space into a thing called a listening room. So over the next 2 or 3 years, you'll see our district grow even more in terms of things you can do to come to the downtown for. We have 8 resident companies, which is phenomenal. Dance Cleveland is one, Cleveland Ballet, Cleveland Playhouse, Great Lakes, the Jazz Festival, the Film Festival, CSU, City Club have come to us in the last couple of years. These are all quite diverse organizations that all do quite different things, and they're all terrific. And again, my experience at London, you think I'm down on London the way I speak, but honestly, South Bank, which is in London, has 6 resident orchestras who all hate each other. And they hate South Bank, and South Bank hates them. And they try and work together, and they fight over schedules for performance dates and so on and so on. At Playhouse Square, we all love each other. The resident companies are wonderful. They do great work. We make sure they get great residencies in the various theatres. It's probably helped by the fact that we have so many theatres, so we kind of allocate the Allen Theatre to Cleveland Playhouse and the Alt Colt, and Great Lakes have the Hannah Theatre, and Cleveland Ballet will use the Mimi Ohio and the Connor Palace. And so we're a big happy family. City Club have their own building, which if you've not been, it's just spectacular. It's great for forums. And then Jazz Fest takes over the whole neighborhood, as does the Film Festival. So it's a really happy collaboration of very disparate companies working together in one neighborhood. So I'm really pleased, and I try and promote the resident companies as much and as often as I can. We actually own 1.2 million square feet of real estate, which I didn't buy all that, by the way. I bought a few, but only in the last couple of years. This, again, is a testament and a credit to people like Art Falco, who over many years acquired a hotel, built the Lumen apartment building, bought more office space. We just converted, actually, it's opening next week, 5 floors of the Bulkley building from commercial floors into residential. So we now have 84 apartments, which we'll use for visiting cast and crew and for people just to come and live in. And again, it helps animate the neighborhood a bit more as well. So it's a very big portfolio, and I'm learning about the real estate side. I came from the show side and the theater side, and learning about hotels and apartment buildings and restaurants and cafes and all of that's new to me, but it's fascinating, and it's a growing area of the business. And I was just saying to Kendra, which she knows about, we also manage a further about 2.7 million square feet of other people's real estate. So we look after places like this, and hospitals and office buildings and various things. And that's a great way to help raise money for our not-for-profit, because we're an unusual thing in that we're a profitable not-for-profit. So we don't have any shareholders and no dividends, but we do make a profit, and every cent we make just goes back into maintaining the theatres, building education programs, and commissioning new works. That's all. I don't get a greater bonus if we make more money, unfortunately. But it's really great then to go out to a funding authority or to a foundation and say, if you support this education project, every penny will go to that project. There's nowhere else for it to go, and any money we make from putting on Anne Juliet or MJ the Musical, the profits all go back into Playhouse Square, which is very rewarding, I have to say, and a great privilege to be the person leading the charge. So I think how am I doing, Pauline? I think we could probably go to questions. Oh, there we are. Look at that. How's that? Happy to take questions on any of that or what I've done before, or whatever you wish, really. I'm an open book.
Well, I think before we have some questions, I have a question of the audience. How did we do? Did we get an A?
A plus, I think, Pauline. A plus.
I could only see one point where we failed, and that was the wood versus the metal. Anyway, we'll open up for questions now.
As a transplant, I think that was a beautiful summary.
Thank you very much.
I'm glad you're here. But my question is more difficult. Do you think we need a $2 billion plus dome stadium?
Oh, that's a great question.
Oh, boy.
Okay, the first thing, I'll answer the question. Is this being recorded? Oh, no. Here's my view, and it's so funny because this whole Brown Stadium thing has occupied far too much airspace in my opinion. In my opinion, it's a non-issue. Here's the thing. When I worked in Sydney, I worked in the Olympic Games, and we built a stadium, a 120,000 seat stadium in the west of Sydney, 20 minutes from the downtown, for the opening ceremony and the athletics and everything else. And they built some hotels and the athletes' village, which housed 15,000 athletes, became apartments after the Olympic Games. And there was great consternation about this is the end of downtown because everything's moving west. The stadium will be an anchor for all these concerts and various things. It wasn't. The stadium was cut down to 80,000 seats after the Games. It was still used for Australian rules and for rock concerts and various things, but people still stayed downtown. Now, the Brown Stadium is used how many times? 9, 10 times a year? Okay, so that's it. And what's the capacity of the Brown Stadium? 45,000? Okay, yeah. Yeah, so let's imagine that you move all of that to, what's it called out, Berea? Brook Park, yeah. So say you build a new, let's say a 60,000 seat stadium. I'm making this up. And you put on, maybe it's domed, so it has more than 9 or 10 events a year. Now, example, in Detroit, there's the Ford Field, which is domed, and we went there for our Leadership Cleveland away day retreat, and they were saying very proudly that they host 120 events a year, because it's domed. And after the presentation, I said to the woman who was giving I said, so when you say 120, do you mean like you fill the whole thing? She said, no, that's events that we host that could be like in a room like this. I said, oh, so how many events do you host in your domed stadium that use the whole stadium? She said, 18 or 20. So that's probably double what a non-domed stadium would do. So I don't think the demand is there for so many events. And even if it is there, let's say the new stadium holds 60,000 people. They're going to build a hotel which will sleep 200 people, 300 people. So where are the other, say 10% come out of town, we've got to then find a place to house 6,000 people. It won't be at Brook Park, it'll be downtown. So downtown will benefit whether the stadium is right on the lake or out at Brook Park. I have no doubt that it's not going to be a factor for the diversity and vitality of downtown, whether it's downtown or out in the west, is my opinion. But there we are. It's probably very controversial to say that, but there we are. I don't mind a bit of controversy. Yeah.
Thank you for all that good comment and pointing out to all of us who've known it, but having it all in one place. I'm Nancy King-Smith, and my question for you is, tell us more about your vision for Playhouse Square, including the Greyhound bus station.
Oh, great question as well. Thank you. So the first thing to say is when I had that whistle-stop tour with Tom Adler, we drove past the Greyhound, and I said, what's that? He said, oh, that's a bus station. He said, and Tom Adler said, yeah, we need to get hold of that. I said, well, Tom, if it's ever for sale, we should just grab it because it's right next to Playhouse Square. So about a year ago, it became available for sale. Well, in fact, the Greyhound sold all of the bus stations that they had left all around the country, and they have also sold all the buses. So Greyhound, the company, doesn't own buses or bus stations. It's basically a ticketing system now, a ticketing company. So we bought the building, and honestly, we bought it not really knowing what we would do with it. But I'd been inside, and the inside, I don't know if anyone's ever been inside it, well, I say it's beautiful. It's original condition. It's not beautiful. It needs a bit of love. But the point is, it's a very large column-free lobby space, which would be, if you imagine where we're sitting now, it'd be as far from here to that back wall, but about 3 times either side. So you could have the most sensational kind of Vegas supper club, music club, cabaret space. I saw a show last week in New York called Titanic, which is a spoof of Titanic. It's a bit hard to explain, but it's very funny. It would work so well in the Greyhound. So that it'll be a new venue for Playhouse Square that will do things that we don't have the space to do now. So I mean things like magic shows or jazz nights or solo performers or ensembles and various things. Still rock and pop, but a bit more loungy, some comedy. I think it's a really intimate space. It will also be a great venue for functions, for weddings and all sorts of things. There's room upstairs also for a fantastically, like a long kind of Waldorf Astoria martini bar. I can just see in my mind's eye. It would be really cool. And we happened to buy also the building next door, which is called the Cleveland Institute of Electronics, but it was originally a meeting house for the Elks of Cleveland. So it was built as the Elks Meeting House in the 1930s. So it's actually a very handsome brick terracotta building. And because the Elks met there, the top floor of the building is a column-free meeting house. So that, again, it's a great performance space. And our plan with that, working with Cleveland Clinic, we're going to start a whole new program of classes for people who are living with dementia, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's. Bring people into that space. It's level access, easy valet and various things, and we'll do classes that will help mitigate the symptoms of those conditions through dance, drumming, singing, and group activities in a really public place. Yeah, it's going to be great. And I know it'll work. I did it in London with the English National Ballet. We started a program called Dance for Parkinson's, and within a month of setting up this program, where people would come in and sign up for a 12-week course, and they would do not ballet, but dance and movement, we had a 3-year waiting list for these classes. There was so much demand. I mean, all of us know people who are living with dementia or Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and the problem with those conditions is they're often quite debilitating, and that means that you withdraw from society, and the more you withdraw, the worse it gets. So the clinic's advice to us, and they're going to work on the science of this with us, is make it very public, very engaging, really fun, and make it social. And what I mean by that is we will let people come an hour before the class and chat and have a cup of tea, do the class, and stay for an hour after the class, and then come to a matinee, and then come to an orchestra rehearsal, and then come and see a load-in or come to a matinee. So it's not just the class, but it's all the things around it as well. And so the building beside the Greyhound will allow us to start that whole program with Cleveland Clinic. So that's, watch out for that. It's going to happen in the next 2 years or so. Great.
Hi, Craig. It's Bill Conway. We met last autumn at the Outcalt Theater in the International Squash Competition.
Yes, indeed.
Now, that seems about as far away from theatrical performance as it could be, but two things I wanted you to comment on about it, please. One is the unique design of the Outcalt Theater, and secondly, how you could put a glass squash house inside a theater and entertain 15,000 people.
That's such a great question. Thank you so much. Well, I have a bit of a history of doing kooky things in odd spaces. So at the Royal Albert Hall, we used to have a tennis tournament every year with all the old and Goldie and old like McEnroe and Lendl and those folk who would be mic'd up and they could commentate themselves as they're bashing the ball around, which was great fun and always sold that every year. We had Mexican masked wrestling at the Royal Albert Hall. And as I was left, I was negotiating with the National Sumo Tournament to bring sumo wrestling back to the Royal Albert Hall. So I love the idea of sports in cultural venues because there should not be, and this is my Olympic voice talking now, any distinction between sport and art. They're so closely linked in terms of exercises for the body and the mind. And the squash is a great example. That squash tournament brings a whole new audience to Playhouse Square. That's really important. It also works closely with Squash in the Land, which is a program in the west of Cleveland to get young people engaged in sport and squash particularly young people from poorer black backgrounds, young black kids without a sort of sense of purpose, come and join Squash in the Land, and then a lot of them become squash players or they become teachers, but it gives them real purpose, and it's a really great adjunct to the squash tournament. But what I love saying about the squash tournament is that tournament happened previously at Grand Central Station, and it still does. The pyramids in Giza in Egypt are now Playhouse Square. So, in terms of putting Playhouse Square on the map, I'm so pleased that we're up there with Grand Central Station and the pyramids of Giza. It doesn't make any sense, but it's really great. And just on the installation question, there's a guy called Jens, who's a Belgian fellow who travels around the world with the Squash Federation installing the courts. And that court was flown over from, I think from Paris, and Jens came with it. It fitted in the Outcalt, which is a beautiful theatre, by 4 inches. So the top glass wall was 4 inches shy of the kind of metal top of the theatre. So We're very lucky. But he was very complimentary, and the great thing with the alcohol is it's a really great, malleable black box space. There's not a bad seat, and the reason it works so well for squash is because the rake of the seats is very steep, so you're sitting above the person in front of you, and it's very intimate, and that's essentially a television event. And so the audience in the alcohol were kind of the studio audience, so they wanted a really engaged, active audience, and you're so engaged because you're basically on the court. So it's a terrific environment. We offered them the stage of the KeyBank State, the lobby of the state. They said, no, too big. We want the alcohol. It's really the perfect venue for squash, and it's on again next year. So come and see it in February next year.
Next question.
Thank you so much for this very entertaining talk. Before I came to Cleveland, I was told many times about the Cuyahoga River going on fire and how many showers you had to take during the summer because of the humidity. I'm thinking about young people, and I'm wondering if you have time to do any special things for young people to encourage them to follow a talent into show business. And, as I think about that, I'm thinking particularly about schools, of course, but also Baldwin Wallace and Oberlin colleges.
Sure. I'm going to make two comments. Firstly, about that river thing, because it really drives me crazy. The number of people that told me this story about the river catching on fire when I arrived, I'd never heard of this before, by the way, and I thought, why are you so down on the city you live in? This is a terrible story. Then I had lunch with the fellow who was previously CEO of Team Neo, which is about job creation in Ohio, and he said, do you know the whole story of that? I said, I'm tired of hearing it. He said, no, I'll tell you the whole story. He said, yes, the river caught on fire, but rivers caught on fire all over the country because guess what? Rivers were very polluted all over the country. The reason this one was notorious was a couple of reasons. The first reason was an article about the river catching on fire was in Life magazine, or Time magazine, and on the front cover was Teddy Kennedy and Chappaquiddick. So it was a really well-subscribed magazine. So a lot of people bought that magazine to read about Chappaquiddick and then read about the river catching on fire. But the other reason, which I think is more important and more about the people of Cleveland, was that incident actually allowed people to lobby the Nixon government to form the EPA. So it was like eco-warriors of Cleveland were saying, enough, we don't want the river to catch on fire, we want to clean the rivers up. So that was the start of a really important wave of eco-warriors saying to the Nixon government, stop doing this. So Cleveland should be bathed in glory for that story. It shouldn't be a laughingstock. So it's a really good story, actually. On the education thing, I alluded before to the university sector here, and I think the important thing to say is we have great institutions here that teach young people about the skills you need to work in our industry. And the other important thing is working in our industry doesn't mean being on stage. That's one very small element of working in this amazing world that I'm lucky to have fallen into. You could be working on stage, you could be working backstage, you could be working in the orchestra pit, you could be conducting, you could be sewing the costumes, making the wigs, putting the wigs on, you could be driving the lorries, you could be working front of house, you could be doing the marketing. There's so many careers in this world, and what's great about people like CSU and Tri-C and Baldwin Wallace and Oberlin and Case Western is they have the faculty to illuminate those careers for young people. And what I hope that we can do is work with them to provide some illumination. So that if you're studying arts management at Baldwin Wallace, you could spend a semester in our finance department or our real estate department or our marketing department learning the actual nuts and bolts of working in this world. And similarly, if you're doing a course at Tri-C, you could be seconded to our hotel and learn about hotel management and event management and restaurateuring and all of these things. So there are some great institutions doing great things, and our job, I think, is to help illuminate the actuality of that as a career move, because there are great careers. And I don't expect that we'll be able to hire all these people, but if we can at least open their eyes to the career potential, they will go away and talk about Cleveland and Playhouse Square and Oberlin or CSU or wherever, and then will be talked about in cafes all across the country as a great place to learn your craft. And sure, they may come back. And a big problem Cleveland has is not enough people, and the talent drain is a real issue here. So if we can just enthuse young people to have a great time, learn about Cleveland, and then of course go away, but then when maybe they have a family and have children, think, you know what, maybe we'll move back to Cleveland. It's low cost of living, great resources, great parks, great hospitals, great education. That'd be a terrific place to bring the children up. So they'll come back to Cleveland. So I hold out hope that the population will increase for reasons like that. But thank you, it's a great question.
Next question.
I think I saw that Hell's Kitchen is coming next season, so I'm very excited about that. Are you finding that, given the size of the totality of our seats and that we have the highest subscriber population, that successful Broadway shows are wanting to kick off their national tours here?
That's a great question. That's like a leading question. It's actually more complicated than that, and I'll just quickly explain why. The reason Hell's Kitchen is here for starting its national tour, and as is The Notebook, and 2 more we'll be announcing quite soon, is because last year we managed to negotiate what's called tax credits for theatre from the state of Ohio. So there were already tax credits for film and theatre, but the problem was, and tax credit means that the person making the film gets a rebate on money spent in Ohio. But the problem was they're all trammeled together with film and theatre, so Spider-Man comes to Cleveland and used up all the tax credits. Superman did the same, and the Avengers and so on. So there was none left for theatre. So we managed to carve out a $5 million pot for theatre. And that sounds like a small amount of money, but that's tons, actually. As a result of that, we're able to entice Hell's Kitchen and The Notebook and 2 more shows soon, and actually Tina in Akron, to come to Cleveland and start the national tour. And actually, Alicia Keys came to Cleveland. She's the creator of Hell's Kitchen, and she was so impressed by the apartments we're building in the Bulkley that she thought, you know what, with tax credits and those apartments, I'm coming to Cleveland. We're going to open here. So it's a combination of a number of things. We do then deliver a great audience. So a show starting here has a great audience to boost it up on its national road. But the other part of tax credits, which I'm working on now, is commissioning shows. Now this is more complicated because the show doesn't exist yet, but there's one show I'm looking at which is, I can't tell you the name, but it's a show based on a really well-known book that was written a while ago, 10 years ago, and had a short season in London. It did okay, but the producer, who's a British producer but works on Broadway, wants to give it another life, like reimagine it as a workshop. So he'll bring it here to Cleveland, receive tax credits, and then we'll start the national tour, then we'll go to Broadway afterwards. And that's a great thing for Cleveland. It's great for our local economy, for all the local businesses and Uber drivers and caterers and various things, but also it's great for Cleveland because when that show ends up winning a Tony Award, they will say, this show began its life at Playhouse Square in Cleveland, Ohio. So the more times we can get Cleveland, Ohio and Playhouse Square into the zeitgeist of the Broadway ecosystem, the better for our profile. So that was a really good question. Thank you so much.
Another question?
I'm just wondering how the marketing department works. Are they reaching out to other locations like Pittsburgh or even Chicago, Indianapolis, other places to get people to come to Cleveland, spend the weekend, see some shows?
Sure. The quick answer is no, because we're very successful. So we sell about 93% of our available seats right now, which is great. Now, but some things need more help than others. But because we have this subscription season, it's incredibly successful. But you can't rest on your laurels and go, oh, well, the job's done. Because what I would like us to do is to do everything we can to raise the profile of Playhouse Square and therefore Cleveland. And our job is not to sell Cleveland, but we can provide a great asset to help people like Destination Cleveland and the city and the county to sell Cleveland. And I would love to get to a point, this is my own sort of personal goal, if I can do this whilst I'm in Cleveland, get to a point where people think, I've got a weekend, I want to go somewhere, And at the moment, they'd probably think, oh, I'll go to Nashville, or I'll go to Vegas, or I'll go to New Orleans. But they don't think, I'll go to Cleveland. And I think, having been here just for 2 years, why not? Why would you not come to Cleveland? And it's for all the reasons I said earlier, because people don't really know what's on offer here. So if we can do everything we can do at Playhouse Square to build up the offer so that if you come to Cleveland, you can see a concert, get a drink, have a meal, hear some comedy, cabaret, see a Broadway show, see Great Lakes, that we can give you a theatrical or cultural experience every weekend of the year, right now. But we need to package that up and explain that in a what's called an elevator pitch to people coming from other parts of the country. I don't really expect that this will be something that will work for audiences coming from London or Paris and so on, but I do think there's a huge domestic audience that would benefit from us doing a better job at selling the city of Cleveland as a weekend getaway. So that's my aspiration.
Next question. I have a question for you.
Of course.
It's kind of a technical one, though. I'm wondering, of your producers, what's the percentage that are from nonprofits versus for-profit?
Gosh, that is a good question. So, well, all the resident companies are all not-for-profits. And everything they do, they are producing houses, meaning right now, Cleveland Playhouse is doing a show called Fat Ham, which is just about to finish. If you haven't seen it, it's really, really good. And that's a show that Cleveland Playhouse produces, meaning they engage the director, the designer, the actors, and they put the show together. We're a presenting organization, so we work with commercial producers and presenters to put shows on stage. Our education team, we produce all the shows they do, or we'll work with not-for-profits that create educational shows as well. So everything in the education space is done by not-for-profits, either us as a not-for-profit or a company like Windmill in Australia or Tall Trees in London and so on, who are charities that put on education shows. But all of the Broadway shows are all commercial shows, and the one-offs that we do, so we have maybe like someone like Jerry Seinfeld comes and does a concert, or Tina Fey, they're all commercial shows. That we, and the way the deal works, and it varies from show to show, but essentially we pay a guarantee to get the show, and then we have an arrangement where we share profits after a certain point. And there are very complicated deals on merchandise and bar sales, and it varies. Someone like Disney, for example, are quite tough about what their deal is, but Disney shows are really popular, so we love how, like Aladdin's a great show, and Snow Queen, Frozen, which I've never actually seen, I'm sorry to say. They do really, really well. And a show like Hamilton, when it comes through, Hamilton is a juggernaut of a show. I mean, that, I'm sure, has everyone seen Hamilton? Yeah, I mean, it's so good. It's really great, and it has a great shelf life. It tours really well. It's well put together. And the great thing with a show like Hamilton is the producers know exactly what they're doing. So that show arrives, loads in, goes up, is performed, and leaves. And it's incredibly efficient. It's very slick. The level of talent is very high, and it's purely commercial. It's done by producers to get a return. What's interesting though, just on the numbers side, the Broadway model is very complicated. And a show like, what's an example? I saw last week Gypsy on Broadway with Audra McDonald. It was fantastic. It was a huge show, and that show will probably cost in the region of 25 to 30 million dollars to get to opening night. That's building the sets and costumes, rehearsing, and all of those things. And that show needs to capitalize, meaning it has to sort of earn enough money to run every week and pay all the actors and all the crew and everyone else, but also return to the investors, the pre-production capital. And it's getting increasingly challenging for shows to capitalize on Broadway. So a show like Six, which maybe you saw when it came here, is a very small show. It has six people on stage and a band of 6. That capitalized quite quickly because it's quite a sort of petite show. But a show like Gypsy, which had a huge star and a huge cast and enormous sets, it's very challenging. But then what will happen? That show will go on tour, and it's called The Road. The Road is a nickname for all the touring locations around the US, and the US is very well served with theaters, not as good as ours, but they're pretty good, around the country. So a tour of, say, Funny Girl or Back to the Future will do incredibly well on the road. And it doesn't mean that it's a huge cost to us, because they amortize the revival cost across so many venues around the country. So actually for Broadway, places like Playhouse Square are really important to the ecosystem, because we're efficient and we return a good profit to the investors and the producers, which they balance against a modest profit for the Broadway season, ironically. So yeah, it's a complicated matrix, but it's lots of fun.
Thank you. I have another question. Do you
Yeah.
work with Port House Theater or Kent State or Akron at all?
We do a bit of work with Kent State, and we actually program the E.J. Thomas Hall in Akron. So in fact, I'm going to see Hadestown on Saturday. So there's a little Broadway season in Akron, and it's interesting that a lot of our subscribers, talking about our sort of what I call the catchment area, it's quite large. We have a catchment area of about 8 or 9 million people that consider Playhouse Square their local theatre. It's phenomenal. And Akron's in that catchment area. So we have to be very careful that we don't program Parade, which is on right now, in Akron. And similarly, we'll put shows in Akron that won't come to Playhouse Square. And a lot of our season ticket holders hold subscriptions of both Akron and Playhouse Square, because the programming is now different enough that you can go and see the 3 Akron shows and the 7 or 8 or 9 Playhouse Square shows. So yeah, it's a good crossover.
We have time for one quick last question.
Gee, quick. You referenced giving people an opportunity in colleges to get started in theater. What is happening? I used to do the red jacket, you know,
Oh, the
when
red
people
coats.
with
Yes,
red coats,
yes.
yeah,
Oh, thank
which my
you.
uncle from Australia said was taking jobs from people that could earn the money, but that was his comment. But what is happening at Playhouse Square with children? You know, there's such a potential in young people who aren't finding, you know, they're not a team player on a sport, but boy, theater could be wonderful for them. So what are you doing for that?
Sure. So firstly, just acknowledge the Redcoats. The Redcoats are this extraordinary army of volunteers. Over 2,000 people are Redcoats, and we rely on them hugely. If we didn't have the Redcoats, it would cost our not-for-profit another $1.4 million a year to staff those shows. So the Redcoats are golden. We love them. They're wonderful. And a lot of them are also donors to Playhouse Square. I mean, they're the most extraordinary group of people. I always say hello to them whenever I see them. They're great. But on the education side, we do a lot of things on the education side. In terms of attendance, we tend to target young people who would never in their wildest dreams come to Playhouse Square. Because if you're from a sort of well-to-do family or middle-class family, you'd probably go with your parents to see a show at Christmas, or come and see Paw Patrol or Bluey or something. But a lot of young people would never in their wildest dreams be allowed to walk into those beautiful theatres. So they're the ones that we target. And KeyBank actually pay for the school buses to bring them. We provide them with lunch. So there's no cost to the school, no cost to the teachers. And it's life-changing for these young people. So just to understand a cultural experience is one dimension. But to your other point, we do a thing every year called the Dazzle Awards. The Dazzle Awards, which you've been, Kathy, I'm sure, it's fantastic. So a lot of high schools around Cleveland area put on a high school musical. And so we have judges that go out and they're judged, and then we have awards at Playhouse Square called the Dazzle Awards for best music, best performer, best ensemble, and all sorts of things. And the first thing to say is that the performances are part of a bigger production. So young people learn how to be on the crew, how to be in the orchestra, how to be in stage management. So they're learning collaboration skills by working on a show. And it's, again, not just about being on stage, it's the whole enchilada. It's everything about putting on a show, including all the back of house skills that you need to learn. And those skills will serve you well if you're working in a factory or a school or a university or an office building. So that's a really helpful foundation. And the other thing about the Dazzle Awards is the winner of Best Actor and Best Actress are sent to New York to be part of what's called the Jimmy Awards. And the Jimmy Awards are like Junior Tony Awards, and this is run by the Broadway League. And the Jimmy Awards is the kind of first port of call for casting agents for juvenile roles in Broadway shows. And there's often an absolute direct pipeline between being in the Dazzle Awards at Playhouse Square, the Jimmy Awards in New York, and then being on stage on Broadway. So it's a really potent and direct way to get onto a Broadway stage. So it's fantastic. And what a positive point to end on.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Craig. This was wonderful.
Thank you very much.
And now let's all move to the Community Center for an hour of reception. Thank you so much for coming.